Good morning. I have just gotten the stream on. I had a little kerfuffle getting the dog out to go to the restroom this morning. So it looks like there's just one person here so far. I am going to take a quick snippet and just go on Twitter to say that this is indeed live. If anyone wants to um, hop on, give me just a moment to remind people. Let me get back to the screen. I apologize having several screens going. So right now, looks like it's just you and me. um, this is breakfast with Tiffany. I don't have a tea this morning because I am just a little bit behind. But what this format is starting in a few weeks from now. This is kind of an early one because we had a lot of stress on our legal system the last week or so. So I thought I would do a trial this week. Um, but the general format is I just wake up in the morning, I grab my tea, we come sit, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. It's very free flowing. It's the kind of thing that if um, I think of myself as a voter first, and if I'm looking at this through the eyes of a voter, I want to be able to get to the person who's going to represent me and just ask whatever questions I want, and to be able to have that conversation. And that is extremely limited in these congressional races. I think I'm the only one who's done a town hall so far, and it was just one quick video. Those will be reoccurring videos that occur, and it's hard to get to people who are running for office. Now, Maine's second congressional district is enormous. I'm just going to chat for a few minutes. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will answer them for you. But Maine's second congressional district is enormous. It's not physically possible for somebody to get everywhere. There's just too much of it. It's certainly not in the window that we have to campaign. I'm all over. I do go to a lot of events. I try to be very available. But if you are up in Presque Isle, I'll probably only be in Presque Isle once or twice during this entire election cycle. If you're in some of the smaller towns, I may not get to those towns at all. We have over 375 municipalities in the second congressional district, and it's just a lot of places with a few people in it, which is what I love about it, but it makes it very hard to get to folks. So what I try to do, and I apologize, I'm still getting used to this new setup. So my camera is not on my computer. It's a separate camera, and I have to remember to keep looking at it, and I keep looking at where it should be on my computer. So I apologize, but the person who designed my computer did a really bad job. I try to make this very free form. I try to make this so that if you have questions, you can ask them. I try to make them so you feel like you have accessibility. And if I'm looking at myself as a voter and not as a candidate, I want to be able to have access to the person I want to vote for and to get to know them. That's why this particular format of event, this is how I really look on Saturday mornings. I have no makeup on. I don't wear much makeup ever anyway. I literally do throw my hair up in a knot. I do just come crash on my sofa first thing. I do actually wear PJs around the house until I have to change on Saturdays. So this is what you would get if you were in my house. This is how I look and authentically am. I think that a lot of what we get when we have candidates is very polished and presented, and we don't really know who we're voting for, and that really bothers me. I want to know who somebody is, warts and all. So I haven't had any questions yet. I'm just sort of filling some airtime. There are a few people who have come on. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I have asked around a bit, and it seems like YouTube is a preferred format to Zoom. Zoom has some difficulties, but what that means is the limitation on the YouTube that I have is that the questions have to come via chat. I'm also looking into other forums, but this just seems to be the one that works best for everybody. So We haven't had any questions yet. We've had a busy week. What are my thoughts on the recent SCOTUS EPA ruling? Goodness, that is a lot. I haven't actually read the ruling. I've only looked at what some legal experts have said, and then, of course, what a lot of not legal experts who are very frustrated have said. My thoughts are that we have government to do a few things for us. And this is where I'll sound a lot sort of libertarian. I like our government to be legislated and controlled at the lowest level that is reasonable and practical. So you wouldn't want your military to be put together by your township. That would be just not a reasonable scale. And you wouldn't necessarily want the federal government paving roads. It's kind of wasteful. They might send funds to smaller towns and counties and states to do that, but that's not the best use of resources. And so the government is there really to make shared purchasing decisions, to protect basic human rights appropriate to the level, and to tackle problems that are just too big for individuals to handle. And you could bundle human rights into that. That really is it really does two things. It's to handle problems that are too big for us to handle on whatever level, whether it's individual, town, county, and to make shared purchasing decisions, which is also part of the too big for us to handle. The problem with the EPA ruling is it foists, to my understanding, that issue on two sort of places. Either the legislature needs to go back in and make laws, and our Congress is not particularly functional at this point in time. It is very divided, and probably more now at any other time than in human history. A lot of the candidates have decided that it is simply more profitable and productive to create conflict than to create compromise and solutions. And that doesn't bode well for the future, unfortunately. If we are throwing this back to the states, so with the EPA, sort of what we had was a federal minimum, and the states themselves could exceed that. And we saw that with California, for example. California has sort of drugged the country along with it with its emission standards. And so if we're taking out some of the agencies, and my understanding this was a fairly narrow ruling, but it could have some fairly broad implications. And I'll have probably a more meaningful opinion on this later when I've had a chance to read it. But we either need Congress to do more legislation, or the states are going to sort of start to fall on their own for environmental issues. Having a federal minimum certainly makes a lot more sense. And the reason why the EPA was put in the first place, and some of this is even a little bit before my time and my memory, but certainly it was fairly recent. When I was a child, I would hear stories about it, like it was in the not distant past. We had rivers that were on fire with chemicals. There's photographic evidence, there's video evidence. Lots of people are alive today that witnessed how bad some of our environmental issues had become. And there were, in particular, there's a lot of states that are more concerned with profit than the health and well-being of their people generally, or just certain groups of people specifically. There is an awful lot of environmental racism. There's an awful lot of putting the environmental concerns in cheap land by the poor people, and creating cancer clusters, creating Superfund sites. When I was a kid, I lived not that far from a Superfund site. It is it's not terrific where we've come from, and we made some really great strides, though we obviously still have some polluting and other issues. But with climate change, we really need to get on the same page, and we are out of time. We've been out of time for a few years. And, sort of the conventional thought of most scientists is that we're probably past a lot of the tipping points or at the tipping point. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be taking action, because there is a lot we can do to mitigate. There's a lot that we can do to prepare. And we see it. We can see climate change happening, and now we can see the effects of it. it's not, where you wake up one morning and it's the day after tomorrow where suddenly we're in a new ice age, or, suddenly we're all living in a horrific swamp. That's not how it works. How it works is that we have more weather events that are more dramatic, that last longer, that that have a higher toll on the areas around us in dollars, in loss of life, um, and it is complicating. So a few more people have joined. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat. This is very free form, and it doesn't have any itinerary. Town halls tend to have a little bit more structure. This is just really a very open Q&A. So I think that it's probably potentially catastrophic for us. And part of what's going on right now is when you have punted so many critical issues for so long, everything's a critical issue. When you have a Congress that isn't working together and doesn't really have a desire to solve problems, that makes it so you can't tackle that pile. And in the last few months, we've had a Supreme Court that is just heaping more urgent problems onto the pile. So I've got an addition that says, my concern is Maine gets a ton of air pollution blown here from southern and western states. So if those states are allowed to pollute more, it impacts us in Maine. Yeah, and that very much ties into what I was talking about with there are some problems that are just too big to solve at different scales. I mean, I actually have people that are like, well, the whole world's polluting and the U.S. doesn't, then why do they get to? And there's so many logical flaws with that argument. But yeah, I mean, our climate change issue, that's a global issue, certainly bigger than what we can solve at the state level. We don't really have much of a capacity to solve it at an international level. The things that we have in place for climate on an international level are, right now we have goals that are self-set by countries. So those are only as good as the countries that are working on them and whether or not they hit the goals. Most of the goals that we have globally or even nationally are to try to get us, sorry, I have AC on in the house because even though I'm personally a little cold, everybody else is not, and it's making my eyes water. So I apologize for that. So yeah, even if we hit the goals that everybody has of, the carbon neutrality by 2050, that's way past the deadlines. So we do get a lot of air pollution in Maine from southern states. It is problematic. That's not something that we can control. That's not something that we can do anything except for help federal interventions on. There would maybe be the possibility of a state-to-state lawsuit if there were provable harms. I don't work in that area of law, so I don't know how complicated that would be. I suspect that would be an awful lot of resources, and with our current Supreme Court would not go very far. And, we could, think about doing that with air pollution. You see a little bit of that tension right now on the West Coast over essentially water rationing. And I don't follow that all that closely. But for those of you that don't pay attention, there is an awful lot of desert on the West Coast. And that desert on the West Coast is fed by some fairly limited water supplies. And they have interstate agreements for how much water they can take out of those water supplies. And the agreements are actually more than the water that comes through there. So it's creating a whole lot of problems right now. And there is a lot of litigation around that. I suspect that litigation would look fairly similar for air pollution here. Although we don't have agreements like they do regarding air pollution. So first you might have to get some sort of agreement. Maybe not. Again, I don't work in that area of law. And that's something that likely, I think our AG would probably have to tackle. I am not sure because that is pretty far afield from the area that I work in. So that would be a very lengthy lawsuit, and it would probably be not particularly easy to put into place. And I suspect that our Supreme Court would be like, well, how do you actually manage the harms? And it would not actually do much. So, I mean, what this really does is it pushes it to Congress to have more oversight and create more laws around these agencies, because right now they're, the agencies were created because it was just too much for Congress to do. And now they're taking a Congress that has too much to do because they haven't done anything for a very long time and putting more back on Congress or sending it to the states. So it's not a great ruling. We are fortunate that many states are much more forward thinking than they used to be. Maine is trying on climate change and environmental issues, and they've made some progress. Some of the stuff we pass is more helpful than others. And part of the problem with that is that Maine has a very hobbyist legislature. Maine's, for those of you who aren't familiar or are from out of area, Maine legislators get paid about $1,000 a month for a 2-year term, and I'm rounding. It's a little off from that. It is not it's paid to be a part-time gig, but it's a part-time gig that makes it so you can't do a full-time gig if you do it well. And so the people who get those jobs tend to be people who are wealthy or retired and maybe somewhat disconnected from this, what everybody needs. They're not a professional legislature. So our Congress is a professional legislature. They're paid sort of commiserate with the work that they do. But if you're frugal, you could live on that. And it seems like $175,000 a year is a lot of money. But after you take out taxes, and you have to have 2 residences, one of which is in one of the most expensive places in the entire country, it lends itself to an awful lot of corruption, which is unfortunate. And honestly, that's part of how we got here is we have a legislature for our country that isn't paid well enough to avoid outside influence. And so a lot of outside influence has gotten in. And I think for a lot of the outside influence, this EPA ruling is very much what was wanted, because there is an awful lot of profit if you don't have to pay for the harm that you do. So I don't know if that answered the question as directly as you were looking for, but I think that it's probably a very unfortunate ruling. I think that it's going to put a lot more pressure on the legislature, on all legislatures, on state legislatures, and also on Congress. And we already have a really hard time getting things done in Congress. Some state legislatures are more functional than others. Like I said, Maine tries hard. Right now, we do have people that are mostly working together because it's controlled by one party. We don't have a particular, it's divided, but it's not divided in a way that makes it impossible to legislate. We don't have a whole lot of purple states left. Maine is a purple state. We do have a fairly healthy mix. A lot of states across the country are very gerrymandered, and that is an issue that's going to need to be tackled. But the Supreme Court that we have right now is not likely to be helpful with that. They've just returned a very gerrymandered map, and so we have, in many states, we have legislatures that are not representative of the population. Maine's is not particularly gerrymandered. Our congressional district really isn't gerrymandered. We only have 2, so it makes it hard to gerrymander lines when you only have 1 line to draw. So, and if for anybody who doesn't know what gerrymandering is, because a lot of people have started paying attention to politics very recently, because I've had a huge uptick in communication just since overturning Roe. People who have never gotten involved with politics have reached out, and they really don't know a lot about it. So you'll see that I periodically define some what seems like pretty basic terms to folks who aren't into it, but you should never be afraid to ask questions. It's important to have an understanding. So for the folks that are watching this now or later, gerrymandering is when you draw districts to make them more or less one political party than would actually be sort of representative of the state, and you can end up with states that are, party A maybe only has 40% of the vote, but party A somehow managed to get 60% of the legislature, so it's kind of a minority rule situation. And you can do that by either condensing all of one political party's votes into small districts, or by thinning those out by pulling in other areas. There aren't a whole lot of rules around that prevent it, other than they have to kind of be one contiguous area. You can't be like this area over here and this area over here with no connection are a congressional district or another district. But that's why you see those very strangely shaped house maps that come up where people are like gerrymandering. That's what they're doing. So it's going to be very difficult to get a lot of environmental issues. Both parties have done gerrymandering in the past. The Republican Party is sort of more notorious for it. The two parties tend to play in different ways. So Republicans tend to gerrymander very heavily and be much more interested in voter suppression in a variety of methods. Not healthy, not good, not great for democracy. And Democrats tend to they gerrymander, but they're like gerrymander light. They try not to be quite as aggressive about it. It's a pretty obvious form of corruption, so they tend to veer away from it. They tend to keep things off the ballot. That's how Democrats tend to do things. They want everybody to vote, but they want to limit what's on the ballot. So both parties have their ways to get the outcome they're looking for. Neither one of them is great. One of them is much more subtle than the other. So, I'm a big proponent of everybody should get a fair vote. Everybody should be able to be represented in Congress. I'm definitely open to things like having DC become a state. Though once upon a time there were some really excellent reasons for it not to be. They don't really apply anymore. If Puerto Rico wants to be a state, they should be able to be a state. I think any of our territories that wants to be a state should be able to be a state. I don't think that should be denied. We've been a country for almost 250 years. We've got a very different set of priorities and a very different view of what different administrative districts look like than happened 250 plus years ago. So sort of a lengthy answer there to air pollution. But yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult to get a lot of those environmental protections taken care of and brought up. We were already struggling, and this is going to make it that much harder. And again, we're out of time. Part of why I'm running, you'll see me say often, is the gentleman I'm running against really don't have it in them for where we are right now in human history. Bruce Poliquin most certainly is not particularly concerned with the environment. And regardless of what Golden's stance may be, I haven't seen much evidence in the form of bills or passion or things that he speaks about that climate change is something that is critical. We have two boys that are 9 and 11. I'd like them to at least have a full, healthy, happy life. I'd like to be able to have grandchildren that have a full, happy, healthy life. It's too early for me to think about grandchildren, but I would like that possibility in the future. We've had a couple more people join us. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will answer them. I'm sort of droning on about the last question, so I'm happy to have other questions. But yeah, we are not on a great path. And one of the things I talk about with climate change is it's very much like maintaining your house. And if you haven't done any house maintenance for 30 years, if you've had a leaky roof for 30 years, you don't need to do some repairs to your roof. You might need a whole house. And we're very close to needing a whole new house, and we don't have a backup for that. So unless you're Elon Musk and can pop on a flight to Mars, which would be very lonely and probably not great and not very inviting to human life, we need to fix what we have here. We need to take very good care of it. So we haven't been doing that, and we are out of time and beyond the 8 ball. We very much need to make that a priority. It is shocking that we haven't taken any sustainable action that's had meaningful impact. I don't know how I can accurately convey how gargantuan of a problem this is that we need to be fighting off pieces of it. We've got a lot of gargantuan problems from climate change to immigration to healthcare that we have just pushed so close to failure that some of them are going to fail. And that's a conversation that people who are running for office aren't having. And that tells me that they probably don't belong in the job. Because if you don't recognize how serious and directly impacting these issues are. Once they start collapsing, we're screwed. So we do need people in there that understand how these impact people, how catastrophic things can be with climate change, with, we are going to have more migration issues and immigration issues that needs to be addressed immediately as a part of climate change. And, we have a very racist system that likes to discriminate heavily about I hear about people who are illegals all the time, but we're not that far away from that being us. So we need to have an awful lot more humanity in how we address those issues, because it might be us at the Canadian border at some point in time if we're not taking care of our planet and our environment. We might not have the resources we need. We have been, I'd say blessed, but a lot of the resources we took were taken inappropriately. We haven't had to really worry about resources much, but it is coming if we do not act as better stewards. So, are there any other questions? I'm happy to keep answering questions, although it's been 26 minutes of sort of hearing my rambling answers at this point in time. I'm happy to answer any. Please put them in the chat. The Drama Cat is trying very hard to join us. So if you haven't met her yet, she is an awful lot of cat. She's very high maintenance. And she was biting my foot. So she doesn't like not being the center of attention, but she also doesn't necessarily want credit for the attention. So she's very high maintenance as animals go. I don't seem to have any other questions. I was sort of killing a few minutes to see if there were other questions. Thank you so much for joining. In about 2 weeks, so starting the week of the 19th, I promised my husband a little break from campaigning and that I would take it light for a 2-week period. And this is the 2-week period that he chose, because coming up after that, we're going pretty heavily into campaigning. So it's going to be pretty light for me the next 2 weeks. And then starting the week of the 19th, we're going to have, unless there's some sort of conflict, we're going to have a town hall every Tuesday, a digital town hall that you can join and ask questions. Those will be slightly more structured. I'll try to have a current topic. And then we'll have something like this that's very free form, a question and answer. Both of them will have a lot of back and forth. If you want to ask questions, I'll be available for those. But I try not to put too much structure on the breakfasts, because I have a limited amount of energy at the end of the week from momming and working and campaigning. I usually have events that are lined up right after it, so I just don't have time to put together something more formal. But also, you should have a chance to get to know who your candidates are. Again, I'm a voter first. I want to know who my candidates are. I wish I had a forum like this for everybody that's running for office, so that I would have the opportunity to have these conversations and see who they really are. You'll see that come through on my Twitter. I very much think that you should get to know who people are, because at the end of the day, when people are out there legislating, these bills are long and complicated and dry and exhausting. And if you don't know how somebody responds to a variety of things, you need to know that they're willing to pay attention in the first place. But the things that come up aren't things that you can campaign for. You can't campaign for things that other members of Congress try to slide in. You can't campaign for how you're going to handle poor wording or adversity when you're trying to do negotiations. Those are things that are just how people's personalities handle things. So I have been going on for about 29 minutes. I have no other questions. The cat clearly thinks that she should be my priority right now. If you need anything else, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Tiffany Bond. You can shoot an email through the website. If you want to reach out to volunteer, happy to take it. I try very hard to not be too much of a burden with volunteers and try to limit the amount of energy that you put into a reasonable amount. If you just want to do one thing to help and throw a few dollars at things, do a main raising, help a business, help a charity in the district. Tell them that I sent you. That note is very critical. I mean, helping is great, of course, but the note is what gives it the magic. And that's a good way to say, hey, I don't really want to get involved in any political things. I don't want to go on any lists. I don't want anybody reaching out to me. But this is somebody I want in Congress So I'm just going to go buy some jam from a small business in the district. I'm going to leave a note. I'm going to say I invested in the community. You get whatever product, so you get to have some nice jams, and the business gets a sale, and then they know it'll come look me up. So that is something that you can do that's helpful, that's low commitment, that doesn't let anybody know who you are. And if you need anything else, we'll see you in a few weeks, or I'll see you on Twitter much sooner. Thanks.